So, I have my sister here, Ellie. Ellie, do you want to introduce yourself properly? And say who you are, say why I'm interviewing you, and tell us where you've been the last month.
Hello, I'm Ellie. I'm Edward's sister. I'm 28. I'm an emergency nurse.
Single?
And I believe he's interviewing me because I have just come back from the Ukraine.
You have just come back from the Ukraine.
Yes.
You're not allowed to say certain things.
Yes.
But I wanted to use this platform
Sure.
for you to share your story of your experience in a war-stricken country.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us in a short scenario story, your experience there, and then I'll ask you more questions with what you can share. But just basically, what would you want hundreds of people to hear your story about?
Yeah. While they're still there, I went with an organisation called Samaritans Purse, and I'm part of their DART team, which stands for Disaster Assistance Response Team. So I've been a part of that team for years, and they are pretty incredible. They will respond to disasters all over the world, and with a very short notice. Mine was about 2 days. They called me on a Monday and said, you'll leave on the Wednesday. And they go and they deploy field hospitals to anywhere in the world. So this time it was in Ukraine, and it was pretty far east in the Ukraine, well past Kyiv, in an area that had only recently been liberated. So it had been under Russian occupation since March. So
you're not allowed to say
where it is. No.
But just near-ish to where you said.
Well, no, much further.
Right, okay. For those, Kyiv is...
The capital.
Is the capital.
It's about in the middle. Kyiv's about in the middle. And I went further east. So anyone can a whole bunch of us that figured, when we were told where we were going, they could do some Googling and make some guesses about where you think we are. Because especially when I say we were in a recently liberated area, that implies that it's somewhere in Ukraine that had been under Russian occupation for the past 6 months.
But unless you have been keeping up to date with what's been happening with Russia, like on the news, you don't hear what's really going on.
Unfortunately, not as much, no.
Unless you're following it with your own articles and your own research, you may do your own. But anyway, sorry, keep going.
So I was there. So it obviously was... it was a long journey to get there.
How long did it take?
From Australia, 5 days, but you fly into Poland and then it takes 2 to 3 days of driving to get, because you're going across the other side of the country. And obviously because it had been occupied by the Russians, it was a site of war. It had been actively bombed. We were in one of the only buildings that wasn't completely destroyed by missiles. That was still structurally intact. So it kind of, unfortunately, just looks like a movie set, if I'm being honest. It doesn't actually look real. The streets are just in rubble. You walk around and everything's just completely destroyed. Buildings, schools, shops. There aren't any shops. There was no internet. There was no electricity.
What was there?
Rubble and people.
Were there kids running around?
Well, we weren't allowed, because there are a whole bunch of landmines that were left littered throughout the city. We weren't allowed to go walking around the city. So we had a very limited perimeter in which we could just do we called them our daily prison yard laps.
That's where you were allowed to walk.
That's where that's where it had been swept and cleared of landmines. But because, Russia has left littered landmines, there are the people that stayed in the country during the occupation. And then because it's been liberated, there are people that are coming back to their homes to see what's left of it.
So there are people who have left that specific area because it was because the Russians took over. Yeah. They invaded. They left.
They got the heads up that Russia was coming that way and had a couple days to leave. So they grabbed what belongings they could and left. So they were coming.
But the people who stayed, did you end up finding out why they stayed?
A lot of older people stayed because it's their home. They wanted to stay, and you had some older people that stayed because they're like, this is my, Ukrainians are very stoic. And I think we've seen that even in the course of the war. No one anticipated that they would do as well as they're doing, and they're doing phenomenally, and they're holding back the Russian army. And they're just incredibly stoic and strong-willed and determined people. And so a lot of these old people wanted to stay, and then some of the younger people stayed to look after their families. And so some people are coming back because it's their homes that they grew up in, homes that they live, farms that they have, and they're coming back to see what's made of it. So they're coming back to their homes destroyed, their livelihood. Because with minimal notice, you're packing up your entire life in a suitcase and leaving. So you're coming back and you're thinking, well, what's left? What's left of my house? What's left of when I left?
Well, what's left of your childhood? What's left of your remnants of life?
So some people stayed because this is their home and they want to stay.
So within your time there, there weren't many people there. As you say, people have fled.
Still a pretty decent amount of people.
So what were you actually deployed there for?
It was a hospital. So we were deployed as a field hospital because the hospital that was in this town had been bombed, had been blown up. So it was still functioning, but it didn't have the full capabilities. And we had an emergency room, an operating theatre, an ICU, wards. We were able to care for these people, and we did an amazing job. We met the mayor of the town, and we worked really closely with the Ukrainian Ministry of Health, and people said that, what we were able to do in terms of providing medical care is the best thing that has ever happened to this area.
You specifically as representing the Samaritans Purse?
Yeah. The medical care and the hospital that we provided was the best thing that had ever happened to this area.
What would have happened if you didn't go? And I'm not meaning you specifically, but I'm meaning Samaritans Purse.
We helped treat people. They had no medical care for 6 months. So,
Nothing.
Well, minimal. It was under Russian occupation. So people, Russia themselves just came into that area and raped, pillaged and plundered.
Yeah, wouldn't they have taken all of their medical equipment?
So they didn't have a lot. So people with really high blood pressures were just taking whatever tablets they could. So we cut off a lot of limbs. People came to us.
Oh, you mean physically?
Yeah.
Like, so
not me personally,
detached limbs, whether it's blown up or anything like that?
No, we cut them off because they were wounds from shrapnel wounds, wounds from bullet wounds, wounds from diabetic feet.
But what do you mean by cut off?
Because the wounds were so far gone and because no one was treating them for the past 6 months, they're not able to be saved. So the way to save their life is to cut off that limb, cut off the toe, cut off the foot, cut off the heel.
So you're actually talking about the physical
cut off,
limb. Not just say, sorry, we're going to have to cut you off your meds.
No. So it's like you haven't had any health care. Everyone's got high blood pressure. They drink, they smoke, and they've got high stress, and then they haven't had anyone. So they might have,
Well, they've got a reason to drink and smoke.
Yeah.
They're going through a war.
But just in general, the Ukrainian culture is kind of like that. They're making their own home strength vodka that's like 20 times stronger than anything else.
Isn't that moonshine?
It's kind of like moonshine. Yeah. But yeah, so we did cut off a lot of limbs, which is saving lives. So it's what we realized that everything is affected by the war, whether directly or indirectly. Directly meaning you've been blown up by a landmine or you've been shot or something like that. And indirectly is because of the war, you haven't had the supplies to look after your wound. You haven't had the supplies to care for your medications. You haven't had the resources to look after yourself. So you will succumb to the injuries or diseases that that we can live with, but they can't, and they'll die from those things, whether it's now or whether it's in a couple of years' time, So
that's the outside world. Go give us a play-by-play of what your daily activities would look like actually in the hospital, in the bunker.
Well, it was a wild experience.
I mean, you've already sorry to interrupt, but you've already told us some stories as a family.
I have, yeah.
Are you able to share some of those?
Yeah, I can.
Stories.
We had no phones, so even that in and of itself is a really unique experience. When in this day and age can you get away for a whole 5 weeks, a month, without having your phone? So we lived entirely in this bubble. Yeah. No news of the outside world. No news of what even kind of is going on in the war, and so you just have each other. So it kind of feels like an old school summer camp some days because, you'll finish your shift and you go up and play games. But we worked every day. It's not a holiday, We worked Monday to Sunday, 7 days a week.
For those people picturing what it might look like, could it have been the scenario of there are people, like, I guess you know the show ER.
Yeah.
You watch the intensity of the shows and there's always people screaming and there's like, scalpel, get this man on an eye drip or something like that. Is it like that, or is it just patiently people waiting, or is it just all of a sudden you're doing your daily duties, and then bam, a person comes in with a limb hanging from his knee.
I work in emergency, right? And so there's always going to be downtime with any job. The Ukrainian culture in general, everything kind of stops at about 3 or 4. They just don't do their errands.
3 or 4
p.m. So we were always really busy. We started off seeing about 100 patients a day, and we moved down to seeing about 60 to 70 patients a day. But we were still open to emergencies.
Jeez,
so
that's a lot. That's more than I remember you saying.
So, but that would all be bottlenecked to about 3 or 4, and then it would be chill in the afternoon, and we would relax, and we'd play games, or we'd chat, or we'd, play jokes on each other, or someone organised a game of dodgeball on the weekend,
What, and you were just playing in the bunker?
No, we were in a 4-story building, so we played on one of the stories of the building. Because on weekends it's also not that busy, because also there's no public transport in this town, and a lot of people don't have cars. So some people are walking 3 kilometres just to come to us, and then they've got to walk 3 kilometres back, and they're walking on wounds, and these are older people. Some of it is primary healthcare stuff. Some of it's manage my wound, manage my medications, manage my blood pressure, manage this. And some of it is emergent situations. That's the nature of emergency. You don't know what's going to come in and what's not going to come in. So each day is different.
Within that, how did you not know that you may get a Russian spy?
We had security with us all the time. We have to maintain neutrality. We have to say that we're going to look after anybody. And that's the way that we can get away with being in the country without being bombed by Russia or Ukraine, because we're not pro-Ukraine saying we're only here because we love Ukraine. We are coming in as a neutral NGO for humanitarian aid.
What does NGO mean?
Non-government organisation. Oh. So we're coming in as a neutral NGO saying we're here to provide humanitarian aid. If a Russian walks in, we'll treat them. If a Ukrainian walks in, we'll treat them. That was obviously really not going to be the case. There weren't going to be any Russians that walked in, but there could be Russian sympathisers, especially being that close to the border. And in a village like that, that was probably our biggest threat in that area, as well as landmines. Now,
tell us, there were 2 stories about specific people with landmines. Mm-hmm. One with the bike, mm-hmm. and then the other one with the guy. You were able to tell mm-hmm. us those stories?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I mean, some of them you kind of have to laugh at, and it ends up being a little bit funny.
Well, when the first time you were telling this, you couldn't stop laughing. It's something from a movie you would see. Yeah. A war-stricken country, but there's a comedy twist to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is probably the nature of any healthcare worker, though. When you're confronted with the stuff that we're confronted with, it doesn't faze us in the same way that it phases other people. We just have a high capacity for this stuff, because that's...
For seeing blood, limbs, gore.
To us, it's just work.
Yes.
And we kind of seek it out in a weird, sadistic way. We actually really enjoy it.
It's weird that you can handle that, but you can't handle people eating off chicken bones.
Yeah, I don't like it. It's gross.
That has never made sense.
No, it's gross. Yeah. We found out that as a lot more people were coming back into the area, they were coming back to their homes. And Russia had littered landmines throughout the whole city and in these people's homes. And these landmines weren't like landmines that you need to step on. These landmines look like shrapnel bits of tank, so that people go to pick them up thinking, it's a bit of tank, or it's a bit of, metal that's fallen off, and then it explodes. And so these old little babushkas, the beautiful ladies, old ladies with headscarves that are adorned with beautiful patterns that have like literal sticks as walking sticks.
Yeah, yeah. They have
hunched shoulders
and backpacks that go across their chest.
Yeah, they're very sweet. So they were finding landmines in their homes as they were coming back, and so they were grabbing these like meter-long sticks and kind of carrying them out to the sidewalk. And this little old lady came in super angry at her neighbour, being like, "Oh, my silly neighbour." We said, "What happened?" And she said, "Oh, well, my neighbour put the landmine in the middle of the road rather than on the side of the ward, and I drove over it with my scooter and got flung from my scooter." And so she was very angry at her neighbour for not following these policies and got this really bad wound on her leg.
Did it blow off her leg?
No, so the scooter took the impact and she got thrown from her scooter. So she was angry that her scooter was destroyed.
So she genuinely just drove over this landmine.
She hit the front of it and then it got got thrown from it. So that was the other reason that, even if an area has been swept in this town, little old ladies might then come and move landmines to an area that's been swept. And so...
Did she survive?
She survived. Yeah. She was more
she's got a
complaining
story
about
for
her
Christmas.
neighbour than anything else. So that's the kind of absolutely horrific thing that Russia would do in terms of leaving landmines that also look like bits of tanks so that it misleads sweet old ladies to come and pick them up.
So within that, the fear was landmines potentially, but there was no fear that you may be air raided or there may be an airstrike inbound.
Not where I was, because there's nothing left to bomb. The whole place has just been destroyed. All the buildings have been destroyed. So there's nothing left to take.
There were no government officials bringing in supplies or, ration packs, food, water.
Now or during the occupation?
During your time there.
During my time? Yeah, the Ukrainian military is coming back into the area.
Right, okay.
Banks are slowly starting to come back. Electricity is slowly starting to come back. But it's going to be a real problem come winter as well, because these sweet old people have no power and they have no electricity and they have no food and they're living in houses that have been bombed and they have no protection from the elements. And I left and it was starting to be about 0 degrees and I was freezing,
Well, especially in a bunker where there's no ventilation and it's just concrete.
We have an incredible team. We had a whole bunch of generators and water supplies, and so we had some heat in our building and we had ventilation. And, people had figured out how to do. We had our own sources, though. We had our own generators and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Electricity is only slowly coming back to this town, and not everybody has it, and not everyone can even afford it. So it's going to be a long, tough winter. But the other one's quite amazing. I wasn't physically there for it. I came a day later. So we looked after him for the whole month that I was there.
This is the other story?
This is the other kid.
Yeah, okay.
This is a 16-year-old kid that was picking mushrooms with his dad and stepped on a landmine and got his leg blown off. And his dad saved his life and put a tourniquet on his leg.
What's a tourniquet?
It's just a tie to cut off the blood supply.
Yeah.
So it cuts off the blood supply so you don't bleed out and die from blood loss.
Yeah.
So he comes into us, and I saw all the x-rays. I didn't physically look after him. It was a day before I arrived, but obviously that's a major surgery. He was there in the hospital for a while, and we looked after him on multiple occasions after that. But the incredible story was that through the process of him coming to the hospital, he got saved, and his dad got saved, and his family got saved. And it's just this powerful story of, we're there to provide healthcare, but we're doing it in Jesus' name. And so what's the point in saving someone's limb if you can't save their soul? And so this friend of mine was kind of sharing devotions one morning, and he was talking about this story of this kid, how some people might be sad by this story and view it as such a tragedy that this poor 16-year-old kid doesn't have a leg anymore. He's got a stump below his knee, but, how sad, how tragic for this poor kid. And he said...
Well, it's going to affect his life forever.
Well, but he's saved now. Mm. And so, this guy shared in devotions, he's like, isn't it far better that this guy, this little kid, has one leg and is in eternity forever, rather than having two legs and walking straight into hell?
Yeah. It takes that passage from James, trials and tribulations very, very seriously.
And so, it puts a new perspective on what you deem as tragedy, and the privilege that it is to not only be able to care for these people, but to actually be able to share the gospel with these people is just as powerful. To be able to come into these places, I got to go into a shelter and share the gospel with these little old ladies. And there is something so powerful about bringing a message of hope into a hopeless situation that far outweighs any med that you can give or any wound that you can look after, which is just, putting a Band-Aid to a bullet hole. The privilege of being able to share the gospel with these people and actually bring hope to something. And you're sowing seeds into something like long after this war is done, like we would sing worship and do devotions and you could hear us and they would stay and they would linger. And you can just see the seeds that are being planted for the church to reap a massive harvest when all of this is done. And it's just such a powerful image of of the body of Christ all coming together in unity. I mean, even all of us here, all of us that were there serving together from literally all across the globe with all different sets of skills here in this one place, because we love Jesus and we're not scared, because we believe that there is no safer place to be than in obedience to the will of God, because that's exactly where you're meant to be. So even though your circumstances seem scary or your life seems scary, none of us actually ever felt afraid in circumstances that probably should have scared us. But none of us did, because we all felt like God was putting something on our heart and we were all obedient to be here. That is the only reason that I'm up here, because other people were giving up time with their families, friends that have kids that have no contact. I had no contact with my family except for emails for a whole month. That's hard for a parent, or people that have sickly parents or kids or children or whatever at home. But they're giving that up because they're being obedient. And so there is no safer place for them to be than in obedience to God's will for their life.
So within that, did you feel as though you got closer with God in seeing so much destruction and devastation? Or were you struggling your own?
I think there's no distractions, right? Like having no phones was actually
as in
a
like
beautiful
Western
thing.
distractions.
Yeah, no Western distractions. It's funny. You don't even know, like people were like, oh, you're going to have such FOMO, you're going to miss out on all this stuff. And I knew a whole bunch of stuff that was going down at home that I was going to miss, but you're not faced with it. You're not seeing it on Instagram or on Facebook or in phone calls every day. So you're not even aware of what you're missing out on. And so that sense of missing out is gone.
Yeah.
But also, you have such a sense of...
And you struggle with FOMO.
I do.
You struggle with FOMO so much to the littlest thing. So this would have been a real game changer for you.
So, but you're not confronted with those things. But also, so I didn't miss out on anything. And I wasn't worried. But also, there is such a sense of joy when you know that you're doing the thing that God has called you to do. And you feel a sense of purpose in that. Yeah. And every day I knew that I was like, this is where I'm meant to be. And this is what I'm meant to be doing. And I just wasn't trying to process. I just want to soak up everything that God has for me for today, whatever it looks like. And none of it, obedience is not in vain, even if it doesn't look like what you think it's going to look like. Even if I'm obedient and I drop everything in 2 days' notice and go to the middle of war torn Ukraine and have all these expectations of what I think it's going to be like. And it's none of those things. It doesn't matter. Yeah. There is still something here to learn of God, and there is still something here that God wants to teach you and show you, because there's more of God to be had.
Yeah, agreed on that. I mean, that's what this podcast is all about. There is more. There's more understanding and interconnection for us to be able to realize that we're not in our own bubble, in our own world, and we shouldn't be. You know, I've got 2 more questions for you. One of them is, what do you want people to know about what's happening in Ukraine that they have forgotten?
I think it's just the fact that they've forgotten. You know, it's funny how distance makes you less dependent. Less distance from God makes you less dependent on God, but distance from everything makes you less aware. You know, I think that now that it's not harassing our news feeds the way that it used to, and it's not all over our television feeds, and it doesn't affect you because, of the recession or because of petrol prices or because of whatever. Yeah.
That's literally what's taking over the news, is inflation and the cost of living in Sydney. But
you forget that that's at the cost of literally someone's life. Yeah. And I think that it's just, be aware that that's still happening and keep it in your prayers. And we don't pray it enough. We do not pray for this war to end enough. We feel silly because why should we keep praying about this? Or we feel uncomfortable because it's still going. It's like, no, we should be praying every day for this war to end. Because even having been there, even if the war ended right now, it's still going to take years for this country to recover and rebuild and restore what was lost. So the longer it goes on, the more that's going to take, the more that is going to be required of us to do that. But also your prayers and your money, it makes a difference. Like Samaritans Purse is probably most famous for Operation Christmas Child, which is the little shoe boxes that people decorate and fill with things.
Oh, is that Samaritans Purse?
That's Samaritans Purse, yeah.
You're kidding.
Yeah. So that's probably what they're most famous for. And sometimes people worry, is this even going anywhere? These toys that I'm putting together, this box that I'm doing, does this even make a difference? And when I was in Ukraine, far east, in the middle of a town that had been bombed, I went out, we went outside and we saw a kid with a shoebox Christmas. And it actually matters and it makes a difference. But just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And this is a test of faith for you to go, okay. But that's the same with any injustice in the world, any heartbreak. This world is ravaged by the destruction of sin, and it needs our prayer, and it needs our intervention, and it needs the gospel. And it can be done. You just have to be willing to do it. So I think it's important to stop being so self-focused, and it's not to say that what I'm doing or what we did is better. There is no better in the kingdom of God. The work that you do for the kingdom matters because it's who you do it for and in the name that you do it. The work is great because the name of Jesus is great. And so that means that whatever you do, whether you choose to take up your cross and go across the country to Ukraine, or you take up your cross and you sacrifice, whatever idol you've got in your own life, whatever friendship issues you've got going on, whatever work issues you've got going on, like whatever sacrifice you need to make, what makes the work great is whose name you do it in, not what you're actually doing. So I'm not better than anybody else. I don't have some supernatural faith and God has some favor on me more than he does on anyone else. I just want more of the Lord. And I have a zeal for the Lord, and more zeal means more zeal, and you want more. When you get more, you want more.
Mm-hmm.
But I think as well, I think quite often about that Brooke Fraser song that talks about, now that I have seen, I am responsible. And there is an element of when you live in silly or in your own bubble and you don't see, you don't think about anybody else but yourself. But I have seen.
What's the name of the song?
I think it's Shadow Feet, but I've forgotten.
By Brooke Fraser.
Yeah, it's like, now that I have seen, I am responsible.
I haven't even
Faith
heard
without
of
deeds is dead.
You can keep going. Not a clue.
It's a famous song, but I think about that often.
Well, you didn't even have music when you were there.
No, I had nothing.
You were the thing that the last question I was going to ask you is, what's the thing that what's the main memory or thing that you're going to take away, or that you have taken away since coming back? But the thing that's taken me aback is you sent an email, or it was sent by Mum, or you sent it to Mum, was that you hadn't listened to music for weeks on end, and you got limited time to watch movies. There was a DVD player, but it was scarce.
USB. Someone had brought a USB with some
and you
movies.
were watching Night at the Museum, and you stayed for the entire end credits because that was the only piece of music you had heard for weeks.
Yeah. It was wild. Me and my friend...
I mean, that's insane.
Me and my friend AJ looked at each other like, oh my gosh! We were like kind of moving and dancing. We're like, oh, it's music, and we just hadn't heard it in ages.
Yeah. It's those little things. Like I can't go without music a day.
You will be. I thought that about TV, right? Like I go to bed.
You watch too much TV.
No, but it's funny. It's a choice, not an addiction, because it was very easy.
Yours is definitely an addiction.
But I can go without it if I needed to. Like, so I was even like,
I don't know.
I did for a whole month.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
So I think I've proven.
No. Sorry, you were saying.
No, like that's the point. Like you don't think that you're possible, but I mean, I remember I shared a devotion while I was over there, and it basically talked about the fact that we're not doing any of what we do in our own strength anyway. Let's not be foolish enough to credit ourselves with our skills and our gifts and our abilities. I didn't wake up one day with a craving to go to war. God put that in me, and I was faithful.
Well, you've actually been twice now.
I have. But I didn't wake up with this craving as if it just came from me.
Yeah.
God put that there. I was faithful to respond, which is what is about taking our faith into action. We have a responsibility. We're active participants in our faith. We have a responsibility. But don't be foolish enough to think that it's in your ability that you will continue that. God was faithful to put it in there. Trust that he will be faithful to sustain you in those things. And so every day that we were there, we weren't relying on our skills or our gifts or our abilities, because they can fail us at any minute. And God is not limited to those things. So God is faithful to sustain us while we are there, every day that I'm there, for whatever I lack. Yeah. And that is true of anyone in any season, in any place. Don't rely on what you think you have, because you actually don't have them anyway. God gave them to you. That's why we're all made completely differently. Mm-hmm. Don't think that, oh, cool, you have that. That's awesome. Why do I have something different? It's like, because God put that in there.
It's that idea and that truth of we're all of one body but many parts.
Yeah.
You know,
And
we all have a
responsibility.
different function and a different gift.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't survive. I couldn't survive doing what you do.
I think you could. I think everyone would be surprised.
I don't know what I'm doing with a knife and a fork.
No, but there's different people there. There was security. There was medical. You'd be terrible.
Medical, I would
But there were lots of
hit
different
myself.
people there. There was member care people there. There was IT, HR, security.
I suck at IT.
Like,
the only thing that I could be able to do if I were in your shoes in war would probably, the only fun thing I'd want to do was clearing the mines, because that's got a bit of risk to it.
You couldn't do that. You need to have security training.
I've played
people,
many Call of Duty games before.
The security people that were our security people were like ex-military that had been in the military for 20 years.
No, I couldn't do anything about what you did.
Yeah.
But anyway, what's the one thing that you have taken away?
I honestly don't know. I feel like it's going to be... I mean, the last 2 times that I went, it's been with friends. The first time that I went, I was blown away with the people that I met, to the point that I then went to America and Canada and visited all those friends. Like, that's a really rare thing. Like, I had known these people at the beginning of the year, and here I was in the random corners of the world visiting them, and the way that God brings people together. But I think in anything, it's reminding me of how big God actually is and how little we make him. And I don't ever want to make God small in my life. He is so much bigger, and I want the immeasurably more than I could ask, conceive, or imagine that he has for me, whatever that looks like. I feel like for years to come, I'll be pulling gems of wisdom with lessons that God has taught me in trusting God and having obedience to God and learning to live for God, and that's all I want. I just want everything that he has for me. You know, when I get to the end of my life and I'm greeted and he says, "Well done, good and faithful servant," I don't want him to then follow up and say, "Oh, it could have been so much easier." Or like, "Oh, I had so much more for you, but you settled for less."
Yeah.
You know, well done, good and faithful servant. But the part that everyone always forgets is the second part of that verse. It says, "You are faithful with the little, and therefore much I will give over to you." We don't all need to have these big, grand, extravagant lives. We can be faithful with the little, you know, and whatever that little is in your life, be faithful because he is faithful. And be faithful because it's who you're being faithful to. His name is great, so make it great. Your life can be great. You can have everything in him, and you can have this full life, even in the picket fence, North Shore suburbs of, you know, Sydney. Your life don't limit God, you know? Just don't do it. There's more.
There is more. You're literally, that's why I've named this There Is More, because I've experienced what you've experienced, but in the tiniest of forms when it came to Hobart.
Yeah.
You've experienced it in a far greater sense, but it doesn't.
But that's the point.
It doesn't exclude the fact that there is more of God for us to understand gain.
That's the point. Go to Hobart, go to Ukraine. It's the same God, and even that blows my mind. We're all serving the same God. Yeah. We're all doing these things.
And it's not the idea of running away.
No,
like you didn't run away from Sydney because you thought Ukraine would be better. Far from it. You went for a different reason.
Yeah. And you know what? It's hard, right? But like, I remember thinking like, that's what counting the cost looks like. Obedience isn't always easy. Doing the thing that you feel like God has put in your heart isn't always easy. But that's what counting the cost looks like, and it's worth it. I can tell you it is worth it. And all the things that I thought that I would miss out on, I just don't even care about, you know. And and sometimes you're frustrated with that sense of perspective, like, you know, when you're going through a hard time and someone goes, "Yeah, but people are dying," or like people are suffering, and you're frustrated with that.
I mean, you did miss a baby shower. So.
I was there for it, actually.
Oh no, I missed it. Oops.
Yeah. But God cares about the little things. It's not to say, let me compare this really intense thing that happened to me and make your experience feel small. Yeah. God actually cares about the little things as well. But it's actually about bringing God into everything, little or big, and then being able to see what he can do in those things.
That's good. Well, I mean, we could continue. You could genuinely, you've got plenty of stories that you could tell.
do.
So I'm
Some are funny.
I'm most likely gonna put your socials underneath where people can read it.
They're private. My socials are private.
Yeah, but people can still reach out to you. I mean, look,
Sure.
most of these people will be friends of friends who will want to hear genuinely. But this isn't just a story of Ukraine, but it's actually about the impact that God has had in that area where it's
Sure.
war-stricken and everything like
And
that.
I will say...
Plus, who the heck... No one knows anyone who's actually been in the Ukraine. I think that this is
See,
fascinating.
it's funny because obviously I know lots of people that have been to
You
Ukraine.
know dozens and dozens. I know one.
I mean, I know many more than that. You know 2. 3.
Who? Oh, you can't say their names, can you?
I probably could, but it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Billy Joel?
No.
I've got no idea.
Well,
Not a
Samaritans Purse is run by Franklin Graham, who was Billy Graham's son.
clue. Oh, there you go. Had no idea that was that
Yeah.
either. Well, anyway, thank you very much, Ellie, for sharing. Do you want to say goodbye?
Goodbye, everybody.
Yep. Bye. Okay. Ciao, Bella.